Today we'll dive into the symptoms of a bad starter solenoid or relay. Many of these signs can easily be mistaken for a weak battery, starter, or even bad spark plugs. But don't worry. If you watch until the end of the video, I'll show you a very easy way to diagnose if the problem is the starter solenoid or relay. What is a starter solenoid? A starter solenoid acts as a switch that connects the battery to the starter motor when you turn the key or press the start button. When you turn the ignition, the solenoid receives a signal to close the circuit, allowing high voltage to flow and start the engine. So, how can you tell if a solenoid is bad? We'll begin with the most critical symptoms and work our way down before ending with a few money-saving tips when fixing solenoid problems. And if you're confused about the difference between a solenoid and a relay, we'll clear that up too before we wrap up. The first symptom of a bad start solenoid or relay is that the engine won't start or crank. Having a car that won't start is like a rite of passage. The most common culprit is the battery, so this should always be ruled out first. You can test the battery easily by using a digital multimeter. I've shared the one I find most reliable and easy to use in the description. You must do this test even if it is a new battery, and I'll explain why later in the video. A healthy car battery should read 12.6 to 12.8 volts with the engine off. Below 12.4 volts suggests it needs charging, and under 12.0 volts indicates it likely needs replacement. With the engine running, expect 13.8 to 14.5 volts. If the battery works great, other possible issues could be the starter or the solenoid. Don't sweat it. I'll show you how to check if your solenoid is busted. The next bad starter solenoid symptom is a clicking noise. If you hear a single click, the solenoid is engaging, but it's not providing enough power to the starter motor. This differs from a rapid clicking sound, which typically indicates a problem with your battery. Of course, even with a single click, it could still be a battery issue, an engine jam, or several other things. That is why it is important to analyze all symptoms to paint a clearer picture. The third sign is visible damage to the starter solenoid. So, you tried starting your engine and it didn't come on, so you decided to look under the hood. Always a good choice. But did you notice any cracks on the body of the starter solenoid or burn terminals? If you did, that is conclusive evidence that the solenoid is gone. However, if you don't notice any damage, you might not be as lucky as you thought, as a defective solenoid could still be the issue. And there are a few more symptoms to check before ruling it out completely. By the way, if you find the video useful and want to see more, subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay ahead on car repair. Now, let's dive back in. The fourth symptom of a faulty starter solenoid or relay is a burning smell. If, after cranking the engine, it refuses to start, but you begin to smell burning wire from the starter, you may have just burnt the solenoid. If you're lucky, the burning could be due to internal corrosion in the solenoid. If you're unlucky, you could have a faulty starter drawing too much current, thus causing the solenoid to burn. When you replace the starter solenoid, ensure you get a high-quality replacement, as cheaper parts are prone to overheating. The next sign of a bad starter solenoid is the engine cranking slowly and weakly. If your engine cranks slowly, it could be a sign that the starter solenoid isn't providing enough power to the starter motor. This can cause the engine to struggle to start. Like most other symptoms, this could also be caused by a weak battery, poor connections, or even a failing starter. The sixth bad starter solenoid symptom is intermittent starting. If your car starts sometimes but not others, it is only a matter of time before it stops completely. This could happen when the starter solenoid is damaged or loses its ability to conduct electricity. It could also be a problem with the ignition switch, coil, spark plugs, or battery. The last bad starter solenoid problem symptom is battery drain. If you have replaced your car battery twice in a short period, it might not be the dealer's fault. It could be that your starter solenoid isn't disengaging. This means that even when your car is off, it still draws power from the battery, which can kill it overnight. Obviously, you need to replace the battery, but before you do that, you need to learn this first. As promised, I will teach you how to test the starter solenoid step by step. But first, let's clear the confusion between relay and solenoid. When you turn the key, the ignition switch sends a low power signal. This signal activates either a relay or solenoid, which handles the heavy electrical load. Both components close the circuit needed to crank the engine. The starter motor demands more power than the ignition switch alone can provide. To bridge that gap, relays or solenoids step in. While their designs differ, their function is nearly identical. They allow a small signal to control a high-power circuit. If either fails, the symptoms will feel the same as already discussed. Most modern cars use solenoids attached to the starter motor. However, relays are often found in the fuse box. Some vehicles even rely on both, with the relay triggering the solenoid. By understanding both parts, you'll diagnose starting issues faster. Whether it's a faulty relay or a failing solenoid, the troubleshooting process remains the same. How to tell if the starter solenoid is bad. Turn off the vehicle's ignition and remove the key to prevent accidental starts. Grab your digital multimeter and switch it to the ohm setting. This allows us to check if the solenoid has proper continuity. Locate the solenoid. In modern vehicles, the solenoid mounts directly on the starter motor. You'll find the starter motor bolted to the engine or transmission near the bell housing where these parts meet. Tracing the positive battery cable can help locate the solenoid since it connects directly to the starter. Older or classic cars may use a remote-mounted solenoid. These are often found on the firewall or in the upper engine bay. Once you've found the solenoid, disconnect the starter cable from the solenoid's M terminal. This terminal connects to the cable that runs to the starter motor. Now, connect one of the multimeter's leads to the solenoid's S terminal. This terminal is where the power from the ignition switch enters. Connect the other lead to the M terminal. Check the reading on your meter. If it shows OL, out of limits, the solenoid isn't functioning properly and must be replaced. For an extra check, connect one lead to the S terminal again. This time, connect the other lead to a ground point on the starter motor's case. If the meter still reads OL, it confirms the solenoid is faulty. At this point, replacing it is your best option to avoid future starting issues. How much does it cost to replace the starter solenoid? Replacing a starter solenoid costs between $445 and $605. Your location, vehicle model, and local fees impact the total. Parts alone cost $325 to $450, while labor ranges from $120 to $100 to $55. Accessing the solenoid can make the job easier or harder. Mechanics may need to remove additional components if the solenoid is integrated into the starter motor. This can increase the labor charge. We've just learned the symptoms of a bad starter solenoid or relay, including clicking noises, intermittent starting, and a non-cranking engine. If you're facing solenoid issues, it's also helpful to understand transmission shift solenoids, as they work similarly. Watch this video, 11 Symptoms of a Bad Transmission Shift Solenoid, to enhance your diagnostic skills.